Blitzkrieg on a pill: how meth fueled the invasion. In May 1940, German tanks didn't just roll through the Ardennes. They stormed into history with a speed no army had ever matched. For over 72 hours, the 1st and 2nd Panzer Divisions, led by generals like Heinz Guderian and Erwin Rommel, pushed through terrain the French believed impassable. Narrow forest roads, steep river crossings. No one thought tanks could pass, let alone dominate. But the Germans didn't slow down. They moved without rest, their engines roaring through day and night. Soldiers stayed awake the entire time, not from adrenaline, not from discipline. From something far more potent: methamphetamine. What made the Blitzkrieg so terrifying wasn't just its speed. It was the unnatural energy behind it. The German army had turned to chemistry. A drug called Pervitin, pure pharmaceutical meth, was handed out by the millions. It didn't just keep soldiers awake. It shut down fear. It erased fatigue. It made men believe they were invincible. Blitzkrieg wasn't just about tanks and tactics. It was about rewiring the human body into a weapon. At first, Pervitin had been marketed to civilians, students, factory workers, even housewives. But the Wehrmacht saw its real potential. They needed soldiers who could go without sleep for 48, even 72 hours. Men who could march, shoot, think, and kill without hesitation. By the invasion of Poland in 1939, elite units were already being issued the drug. And by the time German troops rolled into France, the army had ordered over 35 million pills. Every branch had access: infantry, artillery, engineers, even cooks and messengers. Dr. Otto Friedrich Ranke, a military physiologist in Berlin, had tested Pervitin on university students. The results were exactly what the military hoped for: heightened focus, zero fatigue, improved reaction time. To his superiors, that meant one thing: an army that didn't need sleep, a nation that could run on pills. And it worked. Tank crews operated their machines for 2 days straight. Artillery teams calibrated shells with machine-like precision after 60 hours awake. Infantry marched over 80 kilometers, then launched immediate assaults. Combat engineers built bridges under fire without pause. They moved like machines. Witnesses described their faces as blank, their movements robotic. They weren't machines. They were men, running on meth. Even the Luftwaffe was hooked. Fighter pilots called the tablets Stücke Schokolade, or Hermann Göring pills. In war diaries found after the fall, some described flying missions while feeling awake inside a dream. Their vision sharpened, confidence soared, but judgment declined. Reality blurred. Some pilots made fatal errors in perfect weather. France collapsed in 6 weeks. Guderian's panzers advanced 400 kilometers in just 10 days. Churchill was stunned. French commanders were paralyzed. It looked like genius. In truth, it was chemical warfare from the inside out, but cracks appeared quickly. Soldiers hallucinated. One tank commander opened fire on his own unit. Others suffered heart failure or nervous collapse. Medical officers raised alarms. Reports were filed, but the high command dismissed them. Victory mattered more than side effects. And then something darker began. The same pills that pushed tanks through France were now passed out in a different kind of theater. One with no battles, no tanks, no glory. In the death camps, Pervitin took on a colder role, not to win territory, but to erase hesitation, to help men look mothers in the eyes and still pull the trigger. Drugged into cruelty. Inside the camps of the SS. In the concentration camps of Nazi Germany, cruelty was routine. But behind that routine was more than ideology and orders. It was chemistry. Many SS guards were not just trained to be brutal, they were chemically altered to feel nothing at all. Their cruelty was sharpened by a toxic blend: methamphetamine to keep them alert and aggressive, alcohol to blur the lines of right and wrong, and morphine to shut off whatever guilt or horror might slip through. This wasn't accidental. It was planned. The system didn't just rely on obedience. It relied on chemical detachment, on men so numbed and wired that they could carry out atrocities for hours without hesitation, without feeling, without sleep. In Majdanek, one of the many camps built to destroy entire populations, this chemical detachment showed up in daily routines. One SS officer, known by the camp inmates as In Tom, followed the same rhythm every day. At dawn, he popped a Pervitin tablet. The methamphetamine kicked in fast, sharpening his senses and flattening his emotions. By mid-morning, he was drinking vodka, just enough to stay numb, not enough to stumble. At night, he injected himself with morphine. This cycle of stimulation, sedation, and alcohol gave him the tools to survive the workday, a 14-hour shift of beatings, selections, executions, and silence. Prisoners said his finger moved like a conductor's baton during selections, pointing left or right, life or death, with no expression, no pause, like he wasn't even there. The chemical cocktail made sure of it. But the worst wasn't only in what was done, it was in how the human body became a test subject. In Dachau, Dr. Sigmund Rascher conducted hypothermia experiments. Prisoners were submerged in freezing water for hours to study how long downed pilots might survive in the North Sea. But cold wasn't the only variable. Rascher also used Pervitin to see if methamphetamine could stretch the limits of endurance. Victims shivered, convulsed, and begged for help while Rascher took notes. In Sachsenhausen, forced marches were conducted using prisoners dosed with stimulants. The goal was clear: test how far a human could be pushed with drugs, record the results, and apply the findings to frontline troops. March them until they drop, then try again with a different dose. The results of these experiments weren't kept secret. They were typed, stamped, and sent straight to military offices. From there, the data helped doctors recommend combat dosages for soldiers, how much meth a pilot could take before he started hallucinating, how many days a tank crew could stay awake before collapsing. The camps were part of the supply chain, not just for labor and death, but for knowledge, for drug testing, for tools that the regime could use elsewhere. Human lives were treated as numbers on a lab sheet, disposable in the pursuit of performance. By 1944, the war was turning against Germany. The Eastern Front was collapsing, the Allies had landed in Normandy, and panic was spreading through the Nazi ranks. In the camps, the chemical dependence deepened. SS guards began increasing their doses. Some took 2, 3, or 4 Pervitin pills a day just to stay functional. Their nerves were fraying. Sleep became rare. Many turned to stronger drugs. Meth kept them on edge. Morphine softened the crash. Alcohol drowned the rest. They were walking time bombs, angry, exhausted, and dangerous. As the Allies closed in, many camps were evacuated. Prisoners were forced on death marches through snow and mud, with no food, no rest, and no clear destination. Some guards, high on amphetamines, carried out massacres along the way, shooting hundreds, sometimes thousands, in what survivors later called amphetamine trance killings. These weren't careful executions. They were chaotic, frenzied, full of shouting and blood. By then, the chemical shield between thought and action had completely broken down. When the camps were finally liberated in 1945, Allied troops found more than bodies and broken buildings. They found syringes, tablets, crushed vials, and half-empty bottles. In some offices, empty morphine ampules were scattered across the floors. In guard barracks, they found stashes of Pervitin tablets hidden in lockers. Some SS men were discovered in withdrawal, shaking, sweating, unable to speak. The drugs that had fueled their violence were gone, and the crash had come. There were no excuses left. only the wreckage. But the drugs didn't stop at the camps. Deep inside Hitler's private quarters, another chemical war was being waged, this time inside his own veins. The dictator and the doctor. Hitler's daily doses. By the early 1940s, Adolf Hitler was no longer just a political figure. He had become a carefully maintained machine, kept going by a steady stream of injections, pills, and powders. At the center of this system stood Dr. Theodor Morell, Hitler's personal physician, who from 1941 to 1945 gave him a daily chemical regimen, unlike anything seen before in modern leadership. Morell wasn't a specialist in neurology or psychiatry. He had a background in treating stomach problems and skin infections, but somehow ended up controlling what went into the most powerful man in Nazi Germany. Over 4 years, Morell administered more than 82 different substances to Hitler. Some were common vitamins and glucose shots. Others were far more dangerous. In the morning, Hitler's routine began with a mix of glucose and B vitamins, meant to boost energy and improve mood. But that wasn't all. Morell also injected him with methamphetamine and Pervitin, the same stimulant being passed out to soldiers and SS guards. He added testosterone to fight fatigue and strychnine in small doses, believing it would improve circulation. Through the day, Hitler received repeated doses of Adderall, an opioid used for pain relief and stress. At night, when the drugs wore off and agitation set in, Morell gave him barbiturates to knock him out. This cycle, stimulants in the morning, narcotics in the afternoon, sedatives at night, became Hitler's normal. On the surface, he still appeared in control, delivering speeches and making commands, but behind the scenes, his body and mind were breaking down. By 1942, signs of physical decline were clear. His hands trembled constantly, likely early symptoms of Parkinson's disease. His skin turned gray and waxy. He developed a foul body odor that some described as chemical, almost metallic. The collapse wasn't just physical. Mentally, Hitler grew more paranoid and isolated. His decisions became harder to follow. He refused to retreat from Stalingrad in 1942, even as the German Sixth Army was surrounded. In 1943, he insisted on a doomed offensive at Kursk against the advice of his generals. By 1944, he ordered the Volkssturm mobilization, arming boys and old men for street fighting, believing it would somehow reverse the war. Morell kept the system going, adjusting doses and switching out substances as the effects grew weaker. But by early 1945, nothing worked. Hitler had grown suspicious even of his doctor. In April, as Soviet troops closed in on Berlin, he dismissed Morell. The withdrawal hit fast and hard. Without the chemical balance he'd relied on for years, Hitler's behavior worsened. His final days in the bunker were a mixture of lucidity and incoherent rambling. One moment he would dictate his will with clear focus. The next, he would mutter about betrayal, secret weapons, and imaginary armies. Witnesses said he looked decades older than his age. When his body was found after his suicide on April 30th, 1945, it was described by medical staff as resembling that of an 80-year-old man, even though he was only 56. But Hitler wasn't the only one crashing. Across the collapsing front lines, entire divisions were spiraling into chaos, caught in the same chemical storm that had consumed their leader. The high that led to a national breakdown. By 1944, the miracle drug that had helped the German army punch through enemy lines was now dragging it down. Pervitin, once seen as a secret weapon, had become a dependency. Field reports and medical notes revealed that somewhere between 60 to 70% of frontline German troops were chemically hooked. These weren't just occasional users. They had become physically and psychologically reliant on the pills. At first, Pervitin had made them feel invincible. It removed the need for sleep, dulled hunger, and kept fear out of their minds. But by the time Germany was losing ground on both the eastern and western fronts, the long-term effects were impossible to ignore. Soldiers began seeing things that weren't there: enemy troops in empty forests, tanks in the mist that didn't exist. Some were found frozen in trenches, wide-eyed and motionless, stuck in catatonic states. Others deserted their units or took their own lives when the hallucinations and withdrawal symptoms overwhelmed them. The impact didn't stop at the individual level. It reached into the core of the military's structure. Young men, just 22 or 23 years old, started collapsing from heart attacks and strokes. Doctors examining their bodies found signs of advanced cardiovascular damage, what they described as the hearts of old men. The Luftwaffe, once feared for its speed and coordination, began experiencing non-combat crashes. In one unit stationed in Norway, Jagdgeschwader 5, JG5, 8 pilots died within just 3 months, not from enemy fire, but from exhaustion, blackouts, or judgment errors likely tied to stimulant use. Commanders noticed another change. Discipline was falling apart. Troops demanded more pills, sometimes refusing to fight until they received them. There were recorded cases of low-level mutinies, soldiers disobeying orders or threatening officers over access to stimulants. Some inside the regime saw the warning signs early. Dr. Leonardo Conti, the Reich health leader and a high-ranking medical officer, had begun raising alarms by 1942. He saw the long-term risks, especially the way the drug blurred the line between strength and collapse. But his concerns were buried under the momentum of military need. The High Command didn't want to hear about limits. General Heinz Guderian, one of Hitler's top tank strategists, reportedly brushed off Conti's warnings with a simple answer: "Win first, worry later." That was the attitude that ruled the German war machine in its final years. Short-term strength, no matter the cost. The pills kept coming. Factories pushed out millions more. Doses increased. And the consequences grew worse. As the war turned against Germany, the military wasn't the only group falling apart. Hospitals across the country started to fill with veterans who couldn't cope with life after combat. Some had physical damage from years of chemical use. Others were trapped in psychological spirals, unable to sleep, unable to calm down, unable to function without the drug that had once kept them alive. Psychiatric clinics, already under strain, couldn't handle the surge. There were no official detox programs, no real support. In many cases, former soldiers were simply sedated, restrained, or left to suffer in silence. Dr. Otto Ranke, one of the key figures who had helped push Pervitin into military use, later expressed regret. In a 1946 interview with Allied investigators, he admitted that the drug had been overused, misunderstood, and ultimately damaging. "We destroyed them from within," he said. It was a rare moment of reflection from someone who had helped build the chemical backbone of the Blitzkrieg. By then, though, it was too late. The war was over. The Reich had collapsed. And a generation of young men had been chemically altered by a system that saw their bodies as tools to be pushed past their limits. The darkest side of Nazi meth wasn't just the crimes it fueled or the victories it helped win. It was the silent breakdown it caused at every level, from the minds of individual soldiers to the structure of the army itself. The drug that once promised superhuman strength had hollowed out the people who used it. And when the high wore off, all that was left was exhaustion, confusion, and decay. The fall didn't end with the battlefield. Even after the guns went silent, the drug that once powered an empire didn't disappear. It slipped into daily life under a new disguise. How meth became a household name. By the time German tanks were rolling into Poland in 1939, the drug that would fuel the Blitzkrieg was already a household name. Methamphetamine wasn't born in a secret military lab. It began as a legal product on pharmacy shelves. The story started in 1937 when a chemist named Fritz Hauschild, working at the Berlin-based pharmaceutical company Temmler Werke, synthesized methamphetamine into a tablet form and branded it Pervitin. It didn't take long for it to catch on. Temmler launched an aggressive marketing campaign that pushed the pill as a cure-all for tiredness, stress, and low energy. The ads targeted housewives, students, and workers, promoting Pervitin as a way to keep up with the growing demands of modern life. Boxes of chocolates laced with meth were sold under the nickname Hausfrau Schokolade, or housewife's chocolate. Students were told it would help them study longer. Factory workers were encouraged to take it for longer shifts. By 1938, just 1 year after its release, German pharmacies had sold over 27 million tablets of Pervitin. At first, few questioned the drug's safety. People liked how it made them feel: awake, alert, ready to work. Doctors prescribed it for depression, asthma, and fatigue. But not everyone was convinced it was harmless. Inside the medical community, there were early warnings. Dr. Heinz Kuhne, a German psychiatrist, published reports in 1939 documenting patients who had become paranoid, violent, or emotionally unstable after using Pervitin. Some showed signs of psychosis, but those concerns were swept aside. The Nazi state had no interest in undermining a product that seemed to perfectly match its vision of a tireless, productive society. Reports like Kuhne's were quietly suppressed. Temmler Werke kept advertising. The pill kept selling. And the state started to take a closer look at how it could be used for more than just productivity. It could be turned into a tool of war. By 1940, the military had fully co-opted the drug. Specialized versions were created for specific branches of the armed forces. Fliegerschokolade, or Flyers chocolate, was handed out to Luftwaffe pilots. Panzerschokolade, or tank chocolate, was given to panzer crews. These weren't metaphors. They were literal chocolate bars infused with methamphetamine, designed to give soldiers energy without the weight of pills or injections. Field tests showed that troops on Pervitin could march for 80 kilometers, operate machinery for 2 or 3 days without sleep, and show little fear even under heavy fire. It seemed too good to be true. The drug turned ordinary men into machines, or at least that was the illusion. The widespread military use of Pervitin forced the government to reconsider its availability to the public. As demand spiked on the front lines, some doctors and health officials grew uneasy about the lack of control. In 1941, Dr. Leonardo Conti, the Reich health leader, pushed for tighter regulation. He proposed that civilians would need prescriptions to get Pervitin, though it would remain free and unrestricted for military use. It was a compromise, one that revealed the shifting attitude within the regime. They knew the drug was dangerous, but they also knew it worked. And as long as the military kept winning, ethics were a secondary concern. But the end of the war wasn't the end of the pill. It simply changed uniforms, trading jackboots for lab coats and propaganda posters for prescription labels. A pill's long shadow, from Pervitin to Adderall. When Berlin fell in May 1945 and the war ended in ruin, few could have imagined that a tiny white pill from Nazi Germany would quietly survive, change names, and find a home in school backpacks, tech offices, and military cockpits across the world. Pervitin, the crystal meth used to fuel Blitzkrieg, didn't vanish with the Third Reich. Instead, its story kept going, shifting from battlefield trenches to pharmacy shelves, from SS guards to Silicon Valley coders. This wasn't just a footnote in military history. It was the beginning of a new era in human performance, one that blurred the line between medicine and control. As Germany surrendered, Allied forces scrambled to scoop up more than just land. They wanted brains, scientists, doctors, engineers. Through a secret US program called Operation Paperclip, At least 58 German scientists linked to military drug research were quietly brought to America. These men had worked on meth experiments for soldiers, and now they were placed inside U.S. medical and military research labs. One of them, Dr. Friedrich Hoffmann, had worked at the Berlin Institute of Military Physiology. He was flown to Ohio and given a new identity. At Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, he helped shape stimulant programs for American pilots flying at high altitudes. The same data he'd used to study Nazi tank drivers on meth was now being applied to U.S. Air Force strategies. It wasn't just people that crossed borders. German drug archives were found in bunkers, basements, and medical schools. One 1947 U.S. military report called these records a gold mine. It had test results, dosage logs, and human experiments that would have taken years and millions of dollars to replicate. Instead of starting from scratch, American labs used what Germany had already done. They didn't adopt the ideology, but they used the chemistry. In the late 1940s, a company called Obitrol Pharmaceuticals released a drug called Obitrol. It was marketed as a weight loss aid, especially for women. The pill included a mix of amphetamines, including methamphetamine in its early versions. Doctors prescribed it for obesity, fatigue, and even mild depression. Obitrol wasn't dressed in Nazi uniforms. It was sold with pastel colors and smiling housewives. But chemically, it echoed Pervitin. The 1950s and 60s saw a boom in amphetamine use in the US. Executives took it for energy, students for focus, mothers for weight loss. There was little concern. It was legal, doctor recommended, and even advertised in popular magazines. A 1962 ad for Obitrol showed a housewife beaming. "Now I have energy to clean, cook, and keep my figure." Beneath the surface, it was still meth in a pill, just sold in prettier packaging. By the 1970s, concerns started to grow. Reports came out linking Obitrol to addiction, anxiety, and heart problems. In 1973, the FDA stepped in and forced a reformulation. Methamphetamine was removed, but the amphetamine base stayed. The company changed hands over the years, and by 1996, the updated formula re-emerged under a new name: Adderall. Adderall was approved that year for treating ADHD. Its effects were clear: better focus, alertness, and longer attention spans. It worked, but its roots were still tied to stimulant chemistry developed in Nazi Germany. Today, Adderall is one of the most commonly prescribed drugs in the United States. It's used by children, teenagers, adults. It's taken before tests, job interviews, coding marathons. It's legal. But its DNA reaches back to the darkest war in history. Modern militaries also followed a parallel path. During the Korean and Vietnam Wars, American troops were given dexedrine, another form of amphetamine. It kept them alert during night patrols and jungle ambushes. In the 1990s, U.S. fighter pilots in the Gulf War used go pills for long missions and no-go pills to sleep afterward. These weren't wild experiments. They were structured, regulated, and based on decades of prior research, including what had been gathered from Nazi programs. Outside of medicine, the stimulant culture spread quietly. College students, especially at elite universities, began taking Adderall without prescriptions. A 2012 study estimated up to 30% had done it. Their goal wasn't medical. It was performance. To stay up all night. To ace the final. To keep pace with others doing the same. The pill became part of the race. In places like Silicon Valley, the trend took a new turn. Programmers and tech entrepreneurs talked openly about using nootropics, brain-enhancing substances, to gain an edge. Some were legal, some were gray market. Many shared ingredients with early amphetamines. The line between treatment and enhancement became hard to see. Was Adderall being used to help a struggling child focus? Or was it now a tool for pushing the limits of normal brain function? That question, where medicine ends and performance begins, was the same one buried in the Nazi files from 1940. Pervitin didn't vanish with Hitler's bunker. It morphed, rebranded, and slipped into daily life, into classrooms, boardrooms, and cockpits. What once drove soldiers through smoke and blood now drives students through finals and workers through burnout. The Nazi dream of chemically perfected performance lives on, not in ideology, but in practice. We no longer speak of conquest, only productivity. But the message remains: biology is a flaw, and chemistry is the fix. That chilling legacy lingers, not just in pills, but in the belief that human limits are optional. The war ended, but the pill never did.